up by the host podium in front that had my picture in case I go back, but I haven't been. No.
I want to talk about one more review. Señor Frog. Tell us what Señor Frog is.
Boy, I'm still not sure what Señor Frog is. It's this hallucinatory spring break psychedelic experience in the basement of Times Square that was imported from Mexico originally, and it's just nuts. It's nuts. Their motto is fun, food, and clothes, I think. So I kind of went into it thinking like, okay, food is obviously going to be secondary, and it was. So the food was not the primary focus. But it was fun in a really weird, cheesy way that I tried to fight and found that I was just completely powerless to fight. You know, I just couldn't do it. After a couple of margaritas in these glasses that are shaped like phalluses, you've surrendered your dignity at that point. So you might as well get in the conga line.
Got in the conga line, really?
Yes, and I'm sorry to reveal that. Yes, I have congaed in the course of doing my job. Yes.
With a hat made of, like, what, balloon animals on your head or something?
Oh, yeah. I had this big orange and yellow hat that was kind of like this. I asked the balloon artist, there's a roving balloon artist who'll come to your table and take requests. And I asked him to make me look like the sun. I don't know what I was thinking, but I wanted to look like the sun. So he made me this thing that kind of made me look like I was Simba in The Lion King.
So, as I recall, the review said, don't come for the food, but it really is a good time, right?
Yes, yeah, a particular good time. And the reason I wanted to write about it was because, you know, it's not the most sophisticated fun in the world. It's maybe not even my kind of fun, but it was fun, and I was really struck by how solemn so many of the restaurants I review have become. They have, as I said in the review, it's become like going to church. Everybody used to say going to restaurants now is like theater. There's stage sets, there's drama, there's you know, play acting, and you watch the show. And now, boy, everything's just become so serious, and you sit at the counter and the chef comes out and tells you what he did to the Brussels sprout leaves, and you know, there's not a lot of dancing.
Pete Wells is restaurant critic for the New York Times. After a break, he'll talk about how diners sharing photos of their dishes on social media has affected the way chefs prepare them. And Chef Danny Bowen tells us about his passion for Szechuan cuisine. I'm Dave Davies, and this is Fresh Air.
Neubauer Family Foundation supports WHYY's Fresh Air and its commitment to sharing ideas and encouraging meaningful conversation. Support for NPR comes from NPR member stations and from Universal Pictures with Hail Caesar, The Coen Brothers comedy starring Josh Brolin, George Clooney, Alden Ehrenreich, Ralph Fiennes, Jonah Hill, Scarlett Johansson, Frances McDormand, Tilda Swinton, and Channing Tatum. In theaters February 5th. And from Progressive Insurance. With insurance for cars, home, boat, motorcycles, RVs, and commercial vehicles. At 1-800-PROGRESSIVE and Progressive.com.
When being poor muddies the water for a whole city.
Celebrity and money equal power. And if you have power, you get what you need. If you don't have power, you get left behind.
The governor of Michigan apologizes to the people of Flint, but the water is only part of a much bigger story of neglect. Next time on The Takeaway, weekday afternoons at 3 on 93.9 FM.
WNYC received support from Second Stage Theater, presenting Smart People by Lydia R. Diamond and directed by Kenny Leon, starring Mahershala Ali, Joshua Jackson, Ann Sun, and Tessa Thompson, January 26th to March 6th. Tickets at 2st.com.
Coming up at 3, conversations and analysis of the day's news on The Takeaway, followed by All Things Considered at 4.
This is Fresh Air. I'm Dave Davies in for Terry Gross, who's off this week. We're speaking with New York Times restaurant critic Pete Wells. He's won 5 James Beard Awards for his writing about food and drink. You know, when you go out and you bring guests, you and maybe 3 friends there, they're there for an evening on an expense account and are having fun. You're working. Does that make a difference in perspective that affects perceptions of the food, the experience?
I think it makes a difference. I mean, I sometimes I am more critical than they are. Sometimes I'm less critical than they are. I mean, there's this funny thing that happens where people want to impress the critic by showing how much they notice. So they'll point out some really, really small detail that might be technically, not ideal, but isn't affecting anyone's enjoyment of the meal at all, or some little supposed defect with the food that they end up not caring about. At the same time, they also get to relax and they get to be in the moment, which is really hard for me. So I do sometimes rely on them to have a good time or not have a good time for me while I'm working. If people seem really kind of not to be enjoying themselves, even though I'm sitting there thinking, this dish is pretty good, this is all right, this is fine, and the people I'm with just aren't having fun, then I'll start to look around and say, well, what's going wrong here? What is it about this restaurant that is not lifting us up? Or the other way around. If I think the food's kind of blah, but everyone's having a great time and they're talking and really enjoying it, we walk out and they say, I'd love to go back there again. Then I'll take a closer look at the restaurant. What are they doing right? Often it's the service. The service just lifted everybody up for some reason, or the atmosphere. There's something about the lighting. We all look beautiful and we all feel great because we're so flattered by this light that erases our wrinkles and our dark circles under our eyes, and that stuff is important. I think that stuff is not necessarily what I focus on immediately, but it's what a lot of people take in consciously or subconsciously and goes into their feeling of whether they want to go back or not.
You wrote something about something you described as camera cuisine. What do you mean?
Yeah, it started to seem to me, after I'd been doing the job for a little while, that digital photography and the transmission of digital photography was starting to change food. That Instagram and things like it had become the primary medium through which a lot of people were learning about restaurants and about food, rather than words, which is fine. I mean, I'm a writer, but if you don't want to learn through words, that's fine with me. There are, I think, specific effects of getting your information from photography, and one of them is that the pressure on a dish to be really striking and arresting and different has greatly increased. And the things that might be appealing to you in person, which might be, a plate of stew can look really, really good if you're hungry, but it doesn't look so good on a computer screen or on your phone. In fact, it looks kind of horrible. It just started to seem like there was a lot of stuff that was being composed for the camera, with the result that in some cases, the chef took so long to plate it and put everything into place with tweezers that it's all cold by the time it gets to the table. It's not wonderful anymore, but it sure looks great. And I also thought that because you can go on your phone and check out the Instagram account of a restaurant in Copenhagen and see this dish that doesn't look like anything you've ever done before. If you're a chef, you can think, oh, that's interesting. I've seen that dish, now I can make that dish. Well, you haven't eaten it. You haven't eaten it. You've just sort of seen the style with which it was presented. Maybe you have the ideas some idea of how it was cooked, but you don't really know what the effect is. And so this, visual styles that of putting food on the plate that chefs had developed in one country could turn up in another city in America the next day without the experience of having actually sat down and eaten the food. And that seemed strange and new to me.
Well, Pete Wells, it's been fun. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Pete Wells is restaurant critic for the New York Times. He's won 5 James Beard Awards for his writing. In his list of New York's 15 top restaurants, Wells included Mission Chinese Food, the restaurant of our next guest, Chef Danny Bowen. Mission Chinese Food is one of Bowen's 3 restaurants. There's Mission Cantina in New York and the original Mission Chinese Food in San Francisco. That restaurant started out as a hole-in-the-wall takeout place that Bowen and his friends took over to cook their version of Chinese food. Burnt out from working in fine dining, Bowen cooked food that had an irreverent DIY punk rock attitude. Long lines of people waiting to eat it followed. It was named one of the best new restaurants of 2001 by Bon Appetit and GQ magazines. Danny Bowen was born in Korea and adopted by a family in Oklahoma. He has a new cookbook called The Mission Chinese Food Cookbook with co-author Chris Ying. In 2013, the James Beard Foundation named Bowen Rising Star Chef of the Year, and in 2008, he won the World Pesto Championship in Genoa, Italy. He spoke with Fresh Air producer Sam Brigham.
Danny Bowen, welcome to Fresh Air.
Thank you. I'm super happy to be here with you.
In your book, you say, I knew nothing about Chinese food when we first started. I wanted to figure out how to cook it because I liked eating it. That's pretty audacious, isn't it?
It started because I was curious and I wanted to learn more. And I couldn't really go apply at like a Sichuanese restaurant in San Francisco for a line cooking position because I don't speak Chinese. And the people that I did approach about like trying to like come in and just do a trail or a kitchen stage, they thought I was crazy. They thought I was trying to steal recipes. So that wasn't going to work. So I was just like, well, I'll teach myself. And it is, I feel like, it's audacious, but at the same time, there was no risk.
So there's a lot of different kinds of Chinese food. The one that you were particularly interested in was the Sichuan style. What are some of the traits of that kind of cooking?
Sichuanese cuisine was like something crazy for me out of left field because some of the traits and characteristics of that are like flavor profiles such as like numbing. Like you eat Sichuan peppercorns and Sichuan peppercorn oil, which just it causes your mouth to literally, your tongue goes numb. It almost tastes like you've like licked a battery, which doesn't sound pleasant, but it really is. It's really interesting how that combined with like the dry heat in like Sichuan cooking, those flavors for me as a cook who thought I knew everything at the time, I had never experienced that flavor profile. Very pungent, very spicy, very numbing. I mean, really loud flavors are what Sichuanese cooking, to me, when I first discovered it, I thought that was kind of what the backbone of it was. And then the more I dove into Sichuanese cooking, it's really about like balance and restraint and not having things just be over the top spicy, which I learned after my first trip to Chengdu, to the Sichuan province.
Well, so Mission Chinese Food in San Francisco gets great reviews. It's named one of the best restaurants of the year by a couple magazines. You get great write-ups all over the country. You decide to try to open Mission Chinese Food in New York, and you kind of do it on the quick, like you buy the lease off of this Thai restaurant that's not doing very well. But opening was a lot harder than you thought it was going to be. You were throwing up every morning from the stress of opening.
It's crazy. I mean, opening anything in New York is insane. Everyone was we were under this microscope, and the amount of pressure to perform on like the grandest stage of the mall was just really insane. I don't even know how I got through that.
You did open, and to great reviews again. You know, people called it the best restaurant of the year. Pete Wells in the New York Times said that what you were doing to Chinese food was like what Led Zeppelin did to the blues, and he meant that in a very positive way. But
Right.
it sounds like you were working at this unsustainable pace. Like, I think you said that you were there from 7 a.m. to 2 a.m. 7 days a week. What was your typical day like?
You know, there's not a lot different in what my typical day like is now than then, except for I think that back then I would start drinking around like 6 or 7 p.m. while I was working because I was just so stressed out. Now I have a 2-year-old, so I'm up at 5 a.m. and I don't really go to bed until 2. But my typical day was waking up really early in the morning, going to work, dealing with every problem that you can have, because in the restaurant industry there's always something wrong. And then you work and you try to motivate and inspire the rest of your cooks and stay motivated and inspire yourself, and you just work until you're closed, and then you kind of wrap it all up and do it again the next day. I mean, I still work 7 days a week. I still work over 90 hours a week. But when you own something and you're doing it for yourself, it's like you don't look at it as like work. I don't look at it as like a job. You know, I look at it as like my life, and it's what drives me. But yeah, I just take a lot better care of myself now. I don't drink anymore. I don't do drugs. You can't work that much physically and do those things. It's unsustainable.
Well, everything's going great at the restaurant until it isn't anymore. A health inspector comes and shuts you down twice in a matter of months. They find mouse droppings in the basement, and you write in the book, short of poisoning or and killing someone, there's nothing worse you can have happen at your restaurant. I was a failure. Was that a turning point for you?
Yeah, of course, it was a turning point. I didn't really know how much of a turning point it was for me at the time. I was in shock, and it was extreme failure is what it felt like. I did feel that more than I felt the extreme success we'd had at the time, because all of a sudden it came to a complete halt, like a screeching halt. The restaurant closed. We could have tried to reopen it again, but we knew just as much as everyone else did that if, we looked into like doing it the right way. Like, okay, how much would it cost to just structurally rebuild it to where it will like actually pass inspection and be up to code? And that costs like $750,000 for 1,000 square foot space. It's like, we just didn't make sense.
Well, in 2015, you reopened the restaurant in a new location, and, again, listed in the New York Times as one of the best restaurants of the year. But this time the reviews seem to make it sound like the restaurant's maybe a little more mature, and even in your book you write, we can't be a young punk band forever. Is this some sort of more grown-up version of Mission Chinese Food?
I think that, like, no matter what, like, I'm older now, and I think that I'm a lot more mature. And I was talking to a friend that was visiting the new Mission Chinese, and he's a comedian in New York City. He's lived here for his whole life, and he was just like, when I stepped into that first Mission Chinese, it just felt like the last gasp of, like, what the Lower East Side used to be. And he's like, and I knew when I stepped into that restaurant, it's like, this is amazing, but he knew it wasn't going to last. It was too good. It was just like this crazy, thrown-together party, and he was just like, yeah, but now he's like, this is amazing too, in its own way.
Chef Danny Bowen speaking with Sam Brigger. Bowen's new cookbook is called The Mission Chinese Food Cookbook. We'll hear more after a break. This is Fresh Air.